Leviticus 11. Rules about eating meat. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Tell the Israelites, these are the animals you can eat. If an animal has hooves that are split into two parts, and if that animal also chews the cud, then you may eat the meat from that animal. Some animals chew the cud, but they don't have split hooves. Don't eat these animals. Camels, rock badgers, and rabbits are like that, so they are unclean for you. Other animals have hooves that are split into two parts, but they don't chew the cud. Don't eat these animals. Pigs are like that, so they are unclean for you. Don't eat the meat from these animals. Don't even touch their dead bodies. They are unclean for you." Rules about seafood. You may eat everything that lives in the sea or in a river that has fins and scales, but you must not eat anything that lives in the sea or in a river that does not have fins and scales. Just the thought of eating such a creature should make you sick. This will never change, so don't eat meat from anything like that. Don't even touch its dead body. It is a sickening thought for you to touch anything that lives in the water and does not have fins and scales. Birds that must not be eaten. You must also treat some birds as things that are wrong to eat. Stay away from them. It is a sickening thought for you to eat any of these birds. Eagles, vultures, buzzards, kites, all kinds of falcons, all kinds of blackbirds, ostriches, nighthawks, seagulls, all kinds of hawks, owls, cormorants, great owls, water hens, pelicans, carrion vultures, storks, all kinds of herons, hoopoes, and bats. Rules about eating insects. Don't eat insects that have wings and crawl. Even the thought of eating them should make you sick. But you may eat insects if they have legs with joints above their feet, so that they can jump. You may also eat all the kinds of locusts, all kinds of winged locusts, all kinds of crickets, and all kinds of grasshoppers. But stay away from all the other insects that have wings and crawl. They will make you unclean. If you touch the dead bodies of these insects, you will become unclean until the evening. If you pick up one of these dead insects, you must wash your clothes. You will be unclean until the evening. More rules about animals. Some animals have split hooves, but the hooves don't make exactly two parts. Some animals don't chew the cud. Some animals don't have hooves. They walk on their paws. All these animals are unclean for you. If you touch them, you will become unclean until evening. If you pick up the dead bodies of these unclean animals, you must wash your clothes. You will be unclean until evening. These animals are unclean for you. Rules about crawling animals. These small animals are unclean for you. Moles, mice, all kinds of great lizards, geckos, crocodiles, lizards, sand reptiles, and chameleons. Whoever touches their dead bodies will be unclean until evening. Rules about unclean animals. If any of these unclean animals dies and falls on something, that thing will become unclean. It might be something made from wood, cloth, leather, or sackcloth. Whatever it is or is used for, it must be washed with water. It will be unclean until evening. Then it will become clean again. If any of these unclean animals dies and falls into a clay dish, anything in the dish will become unclean, and you must break the dish. If water from the unclean clay dish touches any food, that food will become unclean. Any drink is unclean in the unclean dish will become unclean. If any part of the dead, unclean animal falls on something, that thing is unclean. It may be a clay oven or a clay baking pan. It must be broken into pieces. These things will remain unclean. They will always be unclean for you. A spring or well that collects water will remain clean, but anyone who touches the dead bodies of any unclean animal in that water will become unclean. If any part of a dead, unclean animal falls on seed that is to be planted, that seed is still clean. But if you put water on some seed, and any part of a dead, unclean animal falls on these seeds, they are unclean for you. Also, if an animal which you use for food dies, whoever touches its dead body will be unclean until evening. If you eat meat from this animal's body, you must wash your clothes. You will be unclean until evening. If you pick up the dead body of the animal, you must wash your clothes. You will be unclean until evening. You must treat all crawling animals that live on the dirt as disgusting things that you must not eat. You must not eat any of the reptiles that crawl on their bellies, or that walk on all 4 feet, or that have many feet. Don't eat these animals. Don't let them make you filthy. You must not become unclean, because I am the Lord your God. I am holy, so you should keep yourselves holy. Don't make yourselves unclean with these crawling things. I, the Lord, brought you out of Egypt, so that you could be my special people, and I could be your God. I am holy, so you must be holy too. These are the rules about all the tame animals, birds, all the animals in the sea, and all the animals that crawl on the ground. These rules will help the people know which animals are unclean, and which animals they are allowed to eat, and which ones they cannot eat. Leviticus 12. Rules for new mothers. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, when a woman gives birth, she will be unclean, just as she is during her monthly time of bleeding. If the baby is a boy, the mother will be unclean for 7 days. The baby boy must be circumcised on the 8th day. Because of the blood from childbirth, another 33 days must pass before she can touch anything that is holy. She must not enter the holy place until the time of her purification is finished. But if she gives birth to a girl, the mother will be unclean for 14 days, just as she is during her monthly time of bleeding. Because of the blood from childbirth, another 66 days must pass before she becomes clean. After the time of her purification is finished, the new mother of a baby girl or boy must bring special sacrifices to the meeting tent. She must give her sacrifices to the priest at the entrance of the meeting tent. She must bring a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a dove or pigeon for a sin offering. If the woman cannot afford a lamb, she may bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons. 1 bird will be for a burnt offering, and 1 for a sin offering. The priest will offer them before the Lord. In this way the priest will make her pure, and she will be clean from the blood of childbirth. These are the rules for a woman who gives birth to a baby boy or a baby girl. Leviticus 13. Rules about skin diseases. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Someone might have a swelling on their skin, or it may be a rash or a bright spot. If the sore looks like the disease of leprosy, the person must be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. The priest must look at the sore on the person's skin. If the hair in the sore has become white, and if the sore seems deeper than the person's skin, it is leprosy. When the priest has finished looking at the person, he must announce that the person is unclean. Sometimes there is a white spot on a person's skin that does not seem deeper than the skin. If that is true, the priest must separate that person from other people for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must look at the person again. If the priest sees that the sore has not changed and has not spread on the skin, he must separate the person for 7 more days. 7 days later, the priest must look at the person again. If the sore has faded and has not spread on the skin, the priest must announce that the person is clean. The sore is only a rash. After washing the clothes, that person will be clean again. But if the rash spreads over the skin after the person has shown himself to the priest to be made clean again, that person must come again to the priest. The priest must look, and if the rash has spread, he must announce that the person is unclean. The disease is leprosy. Whoever has leprosy must be brought to the priest. He must look at that person. If there is a white swelling on the skin, if the hair has become white, and if the skin looks raw in the swelling, it is leprosy that has been there for a long time. The priest must announce that the person is unclean. He does not have to wait until after a period of separation, because he already knows that the person is unclean. Sometimes a skin disease will spread all over a person's body, covering the skin from head to foot. The priest must look at that person's whole body. If the priest sees that the skin disease covers the whole body and that it has turned all the skin white, the priest must announce that that person is clean. But if the skin is raw, that person is not clean. I'm not laughing at leprosy, I'm laughing at my mother, sorry. When the priest sees the raw skin, he must announce that the person is unclean. The raw skin is not clean, it is leprosy. If the raw skin changes and becomes white, the person must come to the priest. The priest must look at the person. If the skin has become white, the person who had the infection is clean, and the priest must announce this. Someone might get a boil on their skin that heals over. Then that boil might become a white swelling or a bright white spot with red streaks in it. If this happens, the person must show the spot to the priest. The priest must look at it. If the swelling is deeper than the skin, and the hair on it has become white, the priest must announce that the person is unclean. The spot is leprosy and has broken out from inside the boil. But if the priest looks at the spot and there are no white hairs in it, and the spot is not deeper than the skin but is faded, the priest must separate the person for 7 days. If the spot spreads on the skin, the priest must announce that the person is unclean. It is an infection. But if the bright spot stays in its place and does not spread, it is only the scar from an old boil. The priest must announce that this person is clean. Someone might get a burn on the skin. If the raw skin becomes a white spot or a white spot with red streaks in it, the priest must look at it. If that white spot seems to be deeper than the skin, and the hair at the spot has become white, it is leprosy that has broken out in the burn. The priest must announce that the person is unclean. But if the priest looks at the spot, and there is no white hair in the bright spot, and the spot is not deeper than the skin but is faded, the priest must separate the person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must look at the person again. If the spot has spread on the skin, the priest must announce that the person is unclean. It is leprosy. But if the bright spot has not spread on the skin but has faded, it is only a scar from the burn. The priest must announce that the person is clean. Someone might get an infection on the scalp or beard. A priest must look at the infection. If the infection seems to be deeper than the skin, and if the hair around it is thin and yellow, the priest must announce the person is unclean. It is a serious skin disease. If the disease does not seem deeper than the skin, but there is no dark hair in it, the priest must separate that person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must look at it again. If the disease has not spread, and there are no yellow hairs in it, and the disease does not seem deeper than the skin, the person must shave, but the diseased area should not be shaved. The priest must separate that person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must look at it again. If the disease has not spread, and it does not seem deeper than the skin, the priest must announce that the person is clean. After washing those clothes, that person will be clean. But if the disease spreads on the skin after the person has become clean, then the priest must look at the person again. If the disease has spread, the priest does not need to look for yellow hair. The person is unclean. But if the priest thinks that the disease has stopped, and black hair is growing in it, the disease has healed. The person is clean, and the priest must announce this. If anyone has white spots on the skin, a priest must look at them. If the spots on that person's skin are dull white, the disease is only a harmless rash. That person is clean. A man might begin to lose the hair on his head. It is only baldness, so he is clean. A man might lose hair from the sides of his head. He is clean. It is only another kind of baldness. But if there is a red and white infection on his scalp, it is a skin disease. The priest must look at him. If the swelling of the infection is red and white and looks like leprosy on the other parts of his body, then he has leprosy on his scalp. The person is unclean. The priest must announce that he is unclean. People with leprosy must warn other people. They must shout, "Unclean, unclean!" They must tear their clothes at the seams. They must let their hair grow wild, and they must cover their mouth. They are unclean the whole time that they have the infection. They are unclean and must live outside the camp. Some clothing might have mildew on it. The cloth could be linen or wool, woven or knitted, or the mildew might be on a piece of leather or on something made from leather. If the mildew is green or red, it must be shown to the priest. The priest must look at it and put it in a separate place for 7 days. On the 7th day he must look at it again. It does not matter if the mildew is on leather or cloth, or if the cloth is woven or knitted, and it does not matter what the leather was used for. If the mildew has spread, the object is unclean because of the infection. The priest must burn it. If the priest sees that the mildew did not spread on the object, it must be washed. It doesn't matter if it is leather or cloth, or if the cloth is knitted or woven. It must be washed. He must order the people to wash it. Then he must separate the clothing for 7 more days. After that time, the priest must look at it again. If the mildew still looks the same, the object is unclean. It doesn't matter if the infection has not spread. You must burn that cloth or piece of leather. But if the priest looks at the piece of leather or cloth and the mildew has faded, he must tear the infected spot out of the piece of leather or cloth. It doesn't matter if the cloth is woven or knitted, but the mildew might come back to that piece of leather or cloth. If that happens, the mildew is spreading, and the object must be burned. But if the mildew did not come back after washing, that piece of leather or cloth is clean, whether the cloth was woven or knitted. These are the rules for mildew on pieces of leather or cloth, whether the cloth is woven or knitted. Why does it do that? Rules for those with skin diseases. The Lord said to Moses, "These are the rules for people who have had a skin disease and have been made well. These rules are for making them clean. A priest must look at those who had the skin disease. The priest must go to them outside the camp and look to see if the skin disease is healed. If they are healthy, the priest will tell them to do these things. They must bring 2 clean birds that are still alive, a piece of cedar wood, a piece of red cloth, and a hyssop plant. Then the priest must order 1 bird to be killed in a clay bowl over running water. He must take the other bird that is still alive and the piece of cedar wood, the piece of red cloth and the hyssop plant, and dip them in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water. He must sprinkle the blood 7 times on those who had the skin disease. Then he must announce that they are clean. After that, priest must go to an open field and let the living bird go free. The people going through this purification ceremony must wash their clothes, shave off all their hair, and wash with water. Then they will be clean. They must go into the camp, but they must stay outside their tent for 7 days. On the 7th day, they must shave off all their hair. They must shave their head, their beard, and their eyebrows. Yes, all their hair. Then they must wash their clothes and bathe their bodies in water. Then they will be clean. On the 8th day, anyone who had a skin disease must take 2 male lambs that have nothing wrong with them, and a 1-year-old female lamb that has nothing wrong with it. They must also take 24 cups of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, and 2/3 of a pint of olive oil. The priest must bring that person and those sacrifices before the Lord at the entrance of the meeting tent. This must be the same priest who announced that the person is clean. The priest will take one of the lambs and the oil as a guilt offering. He will lift them in front of the Lord to show that they were presented to God. Then the priest will kill the male lamb in the holy place where they kill the sin offering and the burnt offering. Like the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest. It is very holy. The priest will take some of the blood of the guilt offering. He will put some of the blood on the tip of the right ear of the person to be made clean. The priest will put some of this blood on the thumb of the right hand and on the big toe of the right foot of that person. The priest will also take some of the oil and pour it into his own left palm. Then the priest will dip the finger of his right hand into the oil that is in his left palm. He will use his finger to sprinkle some of the oil 7 times before the Lord. Then he will put some of the oil that is in his palm on the person to be made clean. He will put that oil on the same places he put the blood of the guilt offering. The priest will put some of the oil on the tip of the person's right ear, on the thumb of the right hand, and on the big toe of the person's right foot. He will put the oil that is left in his palm on the head of the person to be made clean. In this way he will make the person pure before the Lord. Then the priest must offer the sin offering to make that person pure. After that he will kill the animal for the burnt offering. He will then offer up the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. In this way the priest will make that person pure, and the person will become clean. A poor person might not be able to afford all these offerings, so that the poor person can use 1 male lamb as a guilt offering. It will be presented to God so that the priest can make that person pure. The poor person must take 8 cups of fine flour mixed with oil. This flour will be used for a grain offering. The poor person must also take 2/3 of a pint of olive oil and 2 doves or 2 young pigeons. Even poor people can afford these things. 1 bird will be a sin offering, and the other will be a burnt offering. On the 8th day, that person will bring these things to the priest at the entrance of the meeting tent. These things will be offered before the Lord, so that that person can become clean. The priest will take the lamb for the guilt offering and the oil, and he will lift them up to show that they were offered before the Lord. Then he will kill the lamb of the guilt offering, take some of its blood, and put it on the tip of the right ear of the person to be made clean. The priest will put some of this blood on the thumb of the right hand of the big toe of the right foot of this person. He will also pour some of this oil into his own left palm. He will use the finger of his right hand to sprinkle some of the oil that is in his left palm 7 times before the Lord. Then he will put some of the oil that is in his palm on the same places he put the oil from the guilt offering. He will put some of the oil on the tip of the right ear of the person to be made clean. The priest will put some of the oil on the thumb of the right hand and on the big toe of the person's right foot. He will put the oil that is left in his palm on the head of the person to be made clean. In this way he will make that person pure before the Lord. Then the priest must also Then the priest must offer 1 of the doves or young pigeons. He must offer whichever the person can afford. He must offer 1 of these birds as a sin offering and the other bird as a burnt offering. He must offer the birds with the grain offering. In this way the priest will make that person pure before the Lord, and that person will become clean. These are the rules for making people clean after they become well from a skin disease. These are the rules for those who cannot afford the regular sacrifices for becoming clean. Rules for mildew in the house. The Lord also said to Moses and Aaron, I am giving the land of Canaan to your people. Your people will enter that land. At that time I might cause mildew to grow in someone's house. The person who owns that house must come and tell the priest, I see something like mildew in my house. Then the priest must order the people to take everything out of the house before he goes in to look at the mildew. Then the priest will not have to say, everything in the house is unclean. After the people have taken everything out of the house, the priest will go in to look at the house. He will look at the mildew. If the mildew on the walls of the house has holes that are green or red color, and if the mildew goes into the wall's surface, he must go out of the house and lock the house for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must come back and check the house. If the mildew has spread on the walls of the house, then he must order the people to tear out the stones with the mildew on them and throw them away. They must put these stones at a special unclean place outside the city. Then the priest must have the entire house scraped inside. The people must throw away the plaster that was scraped off the walls. They must put that plaster at a special unclean place outside the city. Then new stones must be put in the walls, and the walls must be covered with new plaster. Maybe someone took away the old stones and plaster and put in new stones and plaster, and maybe mildew again appears in that house. Then the priest must come in and check the house. If the infection has spread in the house, it is a disease that spreads quickly to other places, so the house is unclean. The house must be torn down. All the stones, plaster, and pieces of wood must be taken to the special unclean place outside the city. Anyone who goes into that house will be unclean until evening. Anyone who eats in that house or lies down in there must wash their clothes. After new stones and plaster are put in a house, the priest must check the house. If the mildew has not spread through the house, the priest will announce that the house is clean because the mildew is gone. Then, to make the house clean, the priest must take 2 birds, a piece of cedar wood, a piece of red cloth, and a hyssop plant. He will kill one bird in a clay bowl over running water. Then he will take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the piece of red cloth, and the living bird, and dip them in the blood of the bird that was killed over running water. Then he will sprinkle that blood on the house 7 times. In this way he will use these things to make the house clean. He will go to an open field outside the city and let the living bird go free. In this way the priest will make the house pure. The house will be clean. These are the rules for any infection of leprosy, for mildew on pieces of clothes or in a house. These are the rules for swellings, rashes, or bright spots on the skin. These rules teach when something is clean and when something is unclean. These are the rules about these kinds of diseases. Rules for discharges from the body. The Lord also said to Moses and Aaron, "Say to the Israelites, whoever has a genital discharge is unclean. The person is unclean whether the discharge continues to flow or whether it stops. If a man with a discharge lies on a bed, that bed becomes unclean. Everything he sits on will become unclean. If you touch that bed, you must wash your clothes and bathe in water. You will be unclean until evening. If you sit on anything that he sat on, you must wash your clothes and bathe in water. You will be unclean until evening. If you touch him, you must wash your clothes and bathe in water. You will be unclean until evening. If he spits on you, you must wash your clothes and bathe in water. You will be unclean until evening. If that man sits on a saddle, it will become unclean. If you touch or carry anything that was under him, you will become unclean until evening. If he touches you, you must wash your clothes and bathe in water. You will be unclean until evening. If a man with a discharge touches a clay bowl, that bowl must be broken. If he touches a wooden bowl, that bowl must be washed in water. When it comes time for a man with a discharge to be made clean, he must wait 7 days. Then he must wash his clothes and bathe his body in running water. Then he will become clean. On the 8th day he must take for himself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and come before the Lord at the entrance of the meeting tent. He will give the 2 birds to the priest. The priest will offer the birds, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. In this way the priest will make that man pure before the Lord. If a man has a flow of semen, he must bathe his whole body in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the semen is on any clothing or leather, that clothing or leather must be washed with water. It will be unclean until evening. If a woman has sexual relations with a man, and he has a flow of semen, both the man and woman must bathe in water. They will be unclean until evening. If a woman has a discharge from her monthly time of bleeding, she will be unclean for 7 days. Anyone who touches her will be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on during her monthly time of bleeding will be unclean, and everything she sits on during that time will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed must wash their clothes and bathe in water. They will be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything she has sat on must wash their clothes and bathe in water. They will be unclean until evening. It doesn't matter if they touch the woman's bed or if they touch something she sat on. They will be unclean until evening. If a man has sexual relations with a woman during her monthly time of bleeding, he will be unclean for 7 days. Every bed he lies on will be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not during her time of monthly bleeding, or if she has a discharge after that time, she will be unclean, just as during the time of her monthly bleeding. She will be unclean for as long as she has a discharge. Any bed she lies on during the time of her discharge will be like her bed during the time of her monthly bleeding. Everything she sits on will be unclean, just as it is during the time she is unclean from her monthly bleeding. Whoever touches these things will be unclean until evening. They must wash their own clothes and bathe in water. After the woman's discharge stops, she must wait 7 days. After that she will be clean. Then on the 8th day she must bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest at the entrance of the meeting tent. Then the priest must offer 1 bird for a sin offering and the other bird for a burnt offering. In this way the priest will make her pure before the Lord. So you must warn the Israelites about being unclean. If you don't warn the people, they might make my holy tent unclean, and then they would have to die. These are the rules for anyone with a discharge from the body. These rules are for men who become unclean from a flow of semen, and these rules are for women who become unclean from their monthly time of bleeding. Sorry, that was my cat. And these are the rules for anyone who becomes unclean by sleeping with another person who is unclean.